5, 8, and 9. And so you can see that we needed materials, we needed professional development, and we needed the time to make an impact so that we could improve this student data. The next page, I'll bring you back to 2014. We had one individual overseeing science, kindergarten through grade 12. And in our world, the phrase is, you can't expect what you don't inspect. And so having one person overseeing the continuum in language arts, you have an elementary, you have a math, and you have a middle and a high school person. Their skills are very separate and distinct. And so what we did the first year was to target part-time person at the high school, part-time person at the middle school, and then have somebody at the elementary school. This is having a huge impact in those classrooms, observing teachers, modeling lessons, working on the professional development. And so that was a request the first year. For those with elementary students, you might remember at the same time that we put the cap in on French immersion, we implemented a STEM program at grade 1. And again, a lot of work with the school committee and elementary school parents. This was an initiative not in the French immersion program, but in the English Pathways program. And so that implementation is currently in grade 3. And so each year, we've enhanced the science program, trained the teachers around STEM. Janet Sheehan stopped me at the Collycott window today in the first grade to show me the actual robots that the students go to starting in first and second grade to enhance their science program. At the first year, what we asked for in science, as I said, Dr. Spalding said, our students can excel in math and they can excel in language arts, but we needed the science materials. And historically, we'd buy one grade at a time. So this advancement budget enabled us to purchase the materials for grades 6 through 8 that hadn't been purchased, and it's really a 2-year rollout. And they're seeing unbelievable results of those, they're called FOSS kits. They researched and they went, again, we were fortunate enough to have the National Science Conference in Boston and a tremendous amount of professional development with the teachers implementing those science kits. So that's the second year, purchased in the FY14 year, the science kits. And then the professional development to implement, you understand at the middle school, at the elementary school, you're a teacher of language arts, math, and science. And at the middle school, their discipline is science, and so giving them the professional development to implement these new materials. And then indications after that first year at the middle school, the number of students with disabilities, you can see there was an improvement in a proficient and advanced and increase. At the elementary level at grade 5, students who scored warning in science was decreased by half. And again, to Mr. Sorgi's point, after that first year, there weren't new materials. So you look at different groups of children, but there was still an issue in their science scores. We're talking about 1 year of students. And at the high school, there was a significant decrease in the gaps between low-income and non-low-income African-American, Black, and white students and students with and without disabilities. So those were indicators after the first year. Now this current year we're in, what we did was targeted grades 3 through 5 who really didn't have an organized science curriculum and materials, new materials. So this has been a huge emphasis for our teachers in grades 3, 4, and 5 to have these materials, to give them the professional development. Again, I mentioned to you that the STEM initiative this current year is in grade 3, so that's purchasing the material, giving the teachers in the English program the creative programming. We're now looking at 4 and 5, what we're going to do to finish that English 1 through 5 STEM initiative, and then the professional development for these new science materials. I'd say that the professional development is probably required the most detailed and demanding professional development is in the area of science. these science curricula are very, very technical, and it takes a tremendous amount of training with the teachers around these units. And then looking to 2015-16, next year, we've had Dr. Karen Spalding, and we've had discussions at the table around 2 electives that Dr. Spalding has put in around the STEM and the iSTEM initiatives at the middle school. And so a $48,000 .8 teacher would enable us, every student at the middle school takes science, but what this would enable is every middle school student to take a half-year elective in the area of the iSTEM or the STEM. And this would really drive the science instruction. Anyone would understand if you have more science and it's high-level science for all students. So right now, it's only for students who excel in science. But if you want all students to excel, all students, so to have a second science class, an elective, this would enable us to do that. And the instructional support would be a $25,000 request for curriculum materials to go with that, $10,000 purchase for the expansion of the STEM into grade 4. The advancement budget has enabled us 1, 2, and 3. Next year it would go to 4. And the purchase of elementary science. So the continuum, we did the middle school, and this current year we're doing 3, 4, and 5. Next year we'll complete the continuum with the purchase of $35,000 for K-1, 2. And then we'll have materials in place, kindergarten through grade 8, text materials and supplies, and these FOSS kits. And then at the science at the high school, the science at the high school, for those years ago, the MFE had an initiative, and they created a biotech lab at the high school. And this is the last year of the existing money. So we've really used the MFE budget and the school budget to fund this biotech lab at the high school. They're looking to expand the offering. It's now electives. They're trying to expand it. And there's this Parametric Technology Corporation. I sat with them. I can give you a list of the school districts that send their teachers there to be trained in the curriculum that should be put and used in this biotech lab. We would have never, in the taxpayer dollar, been able to create this option at Milton High School without the MFE. But again, we put that last $10,000 purchase in this year, and we've maintained the materials. But after you sit with the science people, you understand that it's a new world, and the digital equipment, again, we've used MFE money, school money, and this would bring that biotech lab and the digital equipment in all of the science classes up to par. And then a $20,000 summer PD around science and STEM. That would be for those teachers in grades 1, 2, and 3. And the last $10,000 at the peer school. As I said once, this rollout in science at the middle school is really over 2 years. I think there are 3 or 4 kits per grade level. The professional development is so demanding, you couldn't give training on these kits. But when we made the purchase, it's economical to make the purchase, but then the rollout of the kits is over 2 years, so finishing that professional development.
Just for people who don't know, including me, MFE money, please?
Right. So in Milton, 25 years ago, a small group created the Milton Foundation for Education. And so the Milton Foundation for Education has an event each year, and they choose a different discipline, athletics, English, the arts, math. This year it's going to be, I saw somebody write it down, STEAM. STEAM is going to be their initiative. Last year it was digital technology. And so what they do is they target the funds. And so we would be coming to you and the taxpayer if it weren't for the MFE. We are ready for PARC because of the Milton Town budget, the capital budget, and the MFE. And quite frankly, you know, the MFE and other foundations we work with, they're very clear in articulating that they don't want to assume the taxpayer's responsibility. They want to enhance the programs, but the MFE has purchased devices that the guide for Park is you have to have enough devices for the largest number. So at Pierce School, let's say it's 340 children at one of the grade levels, you have to have 340 devices. And so at the, and then they'll go to another grade, so this test might run over 4 or 5 days. And at each elementary school, you have to have the number of devices, this is determined by the Department of Education, for the largest number of children in a grade level. And so through those sources, we're able to really, some school districts going into Park this year, some are going to go into Park a year from now, but if we were able to have the number of devices, it was a unanimous decision on the leadership team and the teachers that why would we disadvantage our children and not give them the experience of taking the Park exam this year and not waiting. But there have been a lot of sources that came together to make us ready. We're either going to be ready now or we're going to be ready 11 short months from now for the Park exam. And through foundations, the Copelands, the MFE, the Capital, and the taxpayer, and the PTOs, really, it's an unusual town to have those kind of outside forces in funding sources. Did that answer your question?
While we're on that subject, you obviously have given us information on revolving funds and supplemental grants, but I don't believe that gifts from the MFE or Copeland are listed in there. Can you provide those?
Yes.
The Copelands are in the revolving.
Copelands are in the revolving fund. Okay, thank you.
MFE funds things directly. So when they do small grants for teachers, they decide which grants get accepted and they fund them directly. On the park, some of the infrastructure, they said, you can buy the following things with our money. We ordered on a purchase order, they pay for it. So yeah, the MFE money doesn't show in our revolving funds because they don't pass it through us. They're their own separate entity. But the Copelands, what they do, it goes through there's a Copeland gift revolving fund, in fact, in the revolving funds. We can see that going through.
Thank you. And yeah, I don't know if you can characterize the MFE contribution because, I mean, the thing I noticed in your description of the biotech lab funding in the past is that this was provided by the MFE and that they didn't want to, but also that they don't want to get into subsidizing things they think the town ought to pay for. But in fact, maybe this time they've started a program that is successful, but now they don't want to fund it, or the money for that initial funding has run out. So now they initiated a program, funded it, but now we have to continue funding it. So that's a little bit different.
Well, the biotech lab in particular, the equipment was bought 6, 7 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And in the world of biotech, 6, 7-year-old equipment is not the same equipment anymore. So it's usable, but it's outdated. A lot of it is more analog equipment than digital equipment and so forth. So Ed Mulvey, who was the science department head last year at the high school on an interim basis after our previous science head retired, identified parts of the lab that needed upgrading to make it up to more current standards. So it isn't a matter of, for instance, they weren't paying the salary of the biotech teacher or anything like that. They had bought the initial equipment, but it's to the point now where some of the initial equipment does need replacing and upgrading.
Thank you.
And then to the next slide, Glenn, the metrics that we'll use to evaluate the implementation of the STEM next year through grade 4. These upcoming spring MCAS will be important in grades 5, 8, and 10. And again, we have CPIs marks that we have to achieve. And then on the next page, we have given you a summary grid Glenn has created that the 3 initiatives, staff, technology, instructional materials, extended time, totaling $591,000. And Glenn and the Finance Subcommittee will talk to you how we're working on identifying what funds in the advancement budget could in fact be one-time funds. Glenn, do you want to go into?
Steve?
But just before you move on, I see how much of this is focused on metrics and outcomes. And you had earlier said that Milton has a lot of children coming in and going out. So does MCAS or anything else allow you to correct for that? Because a young child, we could invest a lot of money in them only to have them leave, and then whatever, productivity they have or success they have in their education career accrues to somebody else. And then if you get somebody new that other district should have been giving these kinds of services to but didn't, so it can throw off your numbers. So is there a correction for that, or is
No.
it all just lumped?
No. And it's really fascinating that when children move from district to district, their, MCAS goes with them. So let's say I get a seventh grader in, several seventh graders. Assistant Superintendent Sheehan said, you'll get a grade on your MCAS, but you also get a growth percentile. And so your MCAS travels with you from district to district. But no, when you become a Milton Public School student, you become a Milton Public School student.
So for our own benefit, is it possible to track the children that stay in the system throughout?
But
And
yes,
to make sure that,
well, that's what Chairman Walker spoke. We can give you the data that we've begun, and once we get the data analyst, that's one of the initiatives. But we have some preliminary data on that we can give
that's
you.
not something I'm looking for. I just figure that over the long term, folks will be wondering what return they're getting for this kind of thing.
Right, when the
It's too
child is in the
too soon to
district
know now.
K-12.
Okay.
I have a quick question. I noticed on the MCAS scores for science, you said they were grades 5, 8, and 9. 5 and 8 were, I think, roughly similar, and then the next level, all of a sudden, everybody got proficient. What happened? Is it really 8 to 9? What, can you explain why
They're also different tests.
they are?
Um,
Okay, and
Eight
or
and-
calibrated
five-
differently?
5 and 8 are science tests.
Okay.
9, as we take it at the high school, is strictly a biology test. It's not a full-range science test. So
Okay.
it's a different test, is the short answer.
Right.
And in fact, even in the other scores, they're different tests. You'll find statewide on the math test, students do much better in 10th grade than they do in 8th. And part of it is allegedly because they know they have to graduate from high school, so they have to take it. But the fact of the matter is, the 8th grade math test is slightly higher above 8th grade benchmarks than say, the 10th grade math test is. The 8th grade test is a hard test. It just is. It's harder than the 4th grade test. It's harder than the 10th grade test. It's just, there's a standardized base, and that test happens to push a little beyond it, a little more than some of the others do. Why? I have no idea, but that's what it does. So it's, when you measure them, they are different. They're not always exactly apples to apples.
But Ted asked a great question, because at 5 and 8, it's a test of your 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math. And so the 10th grade test is only biology.
9th grade.
9th grade, good pickup. Good. And so, well, we don't have enough time tonight, but it's very interesting about the science.
Oh, yeah, because the biology at 9th grade, wouldn't have a heavy math component in it, so. Jonathan and then Mike.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Will that turn into a park?
That's what I thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I was looking at, great programs and the $591,000 we need to raise to pay for them. And I wondered if anybody who ever went to Milton High became a billionaire. Or, seriously though, if there's I'm a proud graduate of the State University of New York at Albany, which was a publicly funded institution before. Now it gets 17% of its money from the state. And the rest of it's calling up the graduates and saying, would you kick in? Look at all the great things we're doing. And I know the Milton Foundation for Education exists, but it's not under your control. Has there ever been any consideration given to having a development officer? Or part-time,
So
give
right
point
here,
two of the
right
rest
here.
of this teacher here.
So, first of all, we're a public school. So, there are private schools that are our neighbors that are run on donations, and their headmasters have to go out to their graduates and do that. But we're a public school. The ownership of the public.
Just like my college was, right?
And so we're a public K through 12. So you chose to go to college, people choose to go to college. We have to educate all of the children. We're the citizens, these children are the citizens of this town's responsibility. So we did, through the MFE, hire a grant writer. And not a lot of school districts have grant writers, and I found out why. So we had a grant writer for 2 years. We worked so hard. We actually sent the grant writer's grants to someone in New York City to see if he was as good as his reputation said he was and his references. And what it came out to be was that we're a little fish among a lot of public schools. And so public schools aren't given every grant that we possibly can apply for, we apply for. But he was going out for grants, and that's why school districts don't have grant writers. And so to your point, we've done some alumni work, but alumni give to their colleges. It's very creative, and I'd sit down with you and work on it, and we have an MFE member who's trying to do it. But people, human nature is people seem to give to their colleges and their graduate schools and not their elementary school experience. But it's a great idea.
I'm just in ignorance as an asking a question.
No, you
I didn't know
aren't.
if.
It's a great question. So what I want to say is we've
But you
tried it.
some things.
We've tried it. We spend an inordinate amount of time. It got me going on this. We spend an inordinate amount of time. We really try hard on fundraising. I would tell you, our athletic director trains other athletic directors how to fundraise. That's not something I'm proud of. I want him to train other athletic directors how to be better athletic director and health teacher and evaluate. So we do a lot of work on fundraising. We do, but it's not the nature of alumni funding. They feel that, graduates feel it's the public schools, it's the citizens' responsibility.
Well, Mary, I'm going to ask Tom and Jenny to give some money to the Milton Public Schools. I'm not a graduate of that, but they are.
Yeah, but you are a billionaire.
That's right, in Turkish money.
So since one of the largest parts of the school committee budget is special education, and since we have a fair number of people on the Warrant Committee who haven't been through this before, we thought we'd give a brief primer on special education, as it is one of the more expensive parts of our program. So, you have a lot of reasons for special education. Special education is a large gamut of offerings. We're required to provide our students with special needs with the least restrictive environment in which they can learn. So the default and preferred option is what's called inclusion, where you bring them into the classroom and in regular ed classroom, and you give them support and you try to help them achieve in a regular ed classroom. But there are some times when certain supports aren't available, you might pull them out for some extra pull-out work, but they're in a regular ed classroom most of the time. Or they might be in what's called a co-taught classroom, where there's a number of special education students and a larger number of regular education students. Or they might be in a substantially separate program where they really aren't in a classroom except a little bit of the day, but they're primarily on their own most of the day with more intensive support. Or on the extreme, they could be in an out-of-district placement. They might not be with us at all. So there's a great continuum in special education. And the goal is to keep it down to that front end of the continuum, to keep the kids in district, to keep them in classroom with other children from the town. You know, morally and financially, it's the right thing to do. You want those kids with their other kids. You want them here. You don't want them bused for 45 minutes somewhere else if you can avoid it. So there are lots of reasons for costs of special education. We start with DESI regulations because they are legion as terms of what you have to do. Special education is mandated by the federal government, but many of the regulations are set by the state. You hear a lot these days about children on the autism spectrum. It's a lot more prevalent than was when most of us were growing up, whether that's because there are more children there or just because it's better diagnosed now is irrelevant, because we have to deal with those children. And in fact, just the regulations alone on children on the autism spectrum are volumes, from not just in class, but their social emotional welfare, all sorts of things you have to deal with for those children, and they're not funded. You know, these are one of the many unfunded mandates that the state has. We've developed a lot of special education programs in district to service some of our students who formerly went out of district. When I started on the school committee 12 years ago, we had 90-ish students who were in out-of-district placements. Today we have 47. We are dealing with our students here. We're not sending them off. Transportation, though, is a major factor for those who are out of district. Transportation costs are high. We throw on this list homeless students in here. The McKinney-Vento Act says students who are members of families who are homeless can basically go to any school in any district that they can get to, but we have transportation costs associated with that, at least from the borders of our district in. So the transportation costs for special needs students, even those in district, you know, we may have them in our schools, but we have to send, the small buses to pick them up. We spend more on special education transportation than we spend on regular education transportation. We spend more on the little buses than we spend on the big buses. All right. Considerably more. Some of the other issues, a few years ago, there were stimulus funds from the federal government targeted for special education. They are gone. Circuit breaker is a state source of income that we'll talk a bit about in a minute, but it is dependent on the state budget. And so the extent to which we actually get money from it is somewhat unpredictable.
Of the homeless population that we service, are they all special needs?
No, it gets lumped in with special ed transportation, but they're not all special needs.
Okay, so this is the place to put that category.
For some reason, it tends to get lumped in with special education in most of the regulations and so forth. Homelessness is a separate issue. It really isn't truly special education, necessarily.
Those numbers been getting worse or better over the last 5 years, the homeless?
They're increasing.
Increasing. Maybe you can tell us what they are.
I'd have to look at the number offhand.
You know, I'm gonna give you the exact number tomorrow rather than tell you a number.
Yeah,
that's
no
in.
worries.
Yeah.
Thanks. Just curious.
As an example of our special education development, for instance, children on the autism spectrum, several years ago, we partnered with the New England Center for Children, which has the unfortunate acronym lately in the newspapers, NECC, because NECC is, for another reason, gets rather bad press right now, but this has nothing to do with compounding pharmacies. This particular program was out in Marlborough or Northborough, it's west of Framingham in any case, and it's where it was the nearest program for students on the spectrum. We contracted with them to open a classroom in town. We hired our own aides. We paid their people as advisors to come in and run the program. And it cost us $174,000 for last year, we opened a second program, which we call the Partners Program, which basically opened a second class for these children. But we run it. It's our staff, our teachers. We pay a small fee to NECC to help oversee it, but rather than hiring their people to teach the class, we're running it ourselves. So, our Partners Program we mentioned here is, one special ed teacher and 5 ABA paraprofessionals. ABA is what's the first A? Applied Behavioral Analysis. These are people who are very special training for children with these kinds of disorders. Whereas a class for 5 kids would have a special education teacher and 5 paraprofessionals in it. That seems like a lot of money and effort for 5 children. If you look at the cost of sending them out of district, as we say, at, you know, $350,000 to $400,000 apiece plus transportation, it's a deal. I mean, it really is a tremendous cost savings to do this ourselves. And plus, the kids are here in town. They're in the building with their other kids in their neighborhood and so forth. And they're not on a bus 45 minutes or an hour each way every day to go somewhere or other. So part of our development, and this is primarily because of the school building project. Prior to this, we really didn't have the room. Those of you who remember the days before the school building project remember horrible conditions for some of the special ed classrooms and converted bathrooms in the old Pierce School, and just terrible lack of space. We could never have done this 15 years ago because we didn't have the space for it, let alone the ability to handle it. Now, with the new buildings, we have the space to implement these programs, and we do. And so that's part of the cost. But it's in many ways, it's a cost avoidance.
And so the town should be really proud of that. These families go and see these schools, and you have to have phenomenal programs within the district for families to choose to stay. So these programs have to be outstanding within the district, but to see a family that their child is able to go with the neighborhood children to a neighborhood school, it's an extraordinary story to go from 90-odd to 40-odd students out of district. It's really a good news story, and Glenn will detail all the lists of all the programs we'll be able to create K-12.
Out-of-district tuition costs for the students we do send out of district. Their rates are set by the state. They apply to be for what's called program reconstruction. Some of them are granted increases. Some of them stay fixed. But if you look at, you know, it's very hard to predict which ones are going to get increases in which years. And just an example of the Boston Higashi there, from $245 a day to $312 a day in 1 year. So a child who's out there 180 days a year, that's a huge hit all of a sudden. So I mean, these and their residential program from 488 to 545 a day. So I mean, these are expensive programs that we're going out to some of these.
Can you describe what kind of student would go to the Higashi program versus stay within the district?
Janet, you want to?
Sure. So the students in the NEC program, or the Partners program that we recently developed, are students generally on the autism spectrum, and these are students who are able to again stay in their school community. They're able to respond to the instructional practices. They're able to respond to the programs provided by the ABAs, as we call them, and they meet with some success. Some have such significant learning disabilities that they're not able to respond even at that level. So they have behavioral issues. Some may be very involved with health issues that don't allow them to stay in our program. So it would be a level of significance beyond what we can provide in the school community.
And they do run from, there are levels of out-of-district placements. We have children who go to collaborative placements. Some who go to particular schools. We have, in the extreme, you have students who are residents in what essentially are hospital schools, because they have significant physical disabilities as well as learning disabilities. So I mean, it runs the gamut even in the out-of-district spectrum, from those who can't access the curriculum here to those who really need significant help to even just for their health benefits.
The children who do attend the programs in the district are able to meet with success. One of the great advantages is that they are actually able to be included for some of the activities in the general education classroom. So they're at least able to have some opportunities to socialize with children who are typically developing, and they're able to acquire some social skills. They have to go with an aide, and they need a lot of guidance and redirection, but they do meet with success in this setting. And then, of course, because of their needs, they do need what we'd call a parallel program, a parallel curriculum, so that they do spend much of their day in the sub-separate program.
So again, just a little chart on some out-of-district costs, running in the, $3.5 to $4 million range annually. You can see here, it looks like it's been fairly stagnant over the last few years, but if you look at the middle column, it's because the number of students have been sort of creeping down of late. Last year was 53, and this year 47, and we're still at 3.8 million with 47 students. That's not on the board, but this year's expectation is for the 47 students we have out there, we'll still be at $3.8 million for out-of-district tuitions.
And we meet on these special ed out-of-district placements and transportation every 2 weeks. A team of us at central office with special education, because at any time, a child could have to move into an out-of-district placement. And so we look at children who will be aging out, we look at children who are coming into the district, we look at children who are at the district who have been identified at risk, and sometimes we have a child who's at one private placement, whose needs determined during the year that they have to move into a more restrictive private placement. So again, this is a priority meeting about every 2 or 3 weeks, watching this bottom line and the associated transportation costs with it.
And can you also speak to when a child with significant special ed needs moves into Milton from another town or city, how Milton has to share costs with that, for that particular student, and what the time frame is?
If they move in from another town in Massachusetts, and they move in after April 1st, the town that they were in on April 1st supports them for the next year. So if you move in here in June, it's too late for us to budget for that child. The community from which they move will still pay their bill for that first year while they're with us.
Within Massachusetts, if they're from Massachusetts.
Within Massachusetts. They move in from out of state, they're ours the minute we get them.
Okay.
All right, there's no such reciprocity there. So there is a little lag in the funding, within the state, because the state can mandate that if, a last minute move-in. But they will be ours soon enough. I mean, that's only a minor delay in terms of someone's career. I mean, children who have special needs are ours until either they graduate or until their 22nd birthday. So we have a number of students who we refer to aging out, students who reach their 22nd birthday and have to go into different kinds of settings, but they're not our settings.
And of course, it would, if our students move away to a different state, then they're theirs.
Right.
Or if they move to a different town in Massachusetts, the April 1st deadline, obviously.
Right.
Glenn,
Yep.
we might want to add too that children with fewer, with less significant needs who move into the district, if they have IEPs, we're required, of course, to honor those IEPs and incorporate their goals into our instructional program. So that could have an impact on staffing if we have enough children who move into the district on IEPs.
IEPs are individualized
I'm sorry, yes.
educational plans.
Yes, I apologize.
We acronym you to death.
I know.
Referring to circuit breaker, which I did a minute ago, the state has a formula to help support those students whose costs are very large. If you have any student for whom you are spending in excess of the current base is about $41,000 and change, the law says that the state will pick up 75% of the amount over that threshold. That's the law. That's subject to funding. It's been more often not 75% than it has been 75%. It's been as low as 50% in the last few years. It's been running around 70% currently. And it's paid a year in arrears. So you're getting paid your circuit breaker money this year for what your allowable costs were last year. So when we detail the budget, the section on special ed refers to the out-of-district costs, and it says net of circuit breaker. You see the chart we have in there to see how much circuit breaker we're anticipating. And so the town picks up basically the net cost of the out-of-district placement. So circuit breaker, for instance, this past year is on the order of $1.3 million.
Glenn, how does that make its way back to the town?
It's paid quarterly back to the town. It goes into one of the revolving funds that you'll see in the budget book.
Doesn't go back to the schools, it goes back to the
No, it
town?
goes back to the schools into one of our revolving funds. Several years ago, we had a home rule petition that allowed that. So in many towns, it just goes straight into the general fund.
So I'd say on the emails, circuit breaker and the percentage of circuit breaker is the most discussed item among superintendents, business managers, and sped directors. It's a volatile number.
And as I mentioned at the bottom, transportation costs are not included in the circuit breaker, and that's an issue as well, because transportation costs for out-of-district students can be enormous. But that's not, it doesn't figure into the cost for which there's reimbursement. That's, again, every year, for the last several years in the State House, there has been a bill filed and never passed to try to get that rolled in, because it's especially in Western Mass, where places are farther apart than they are right around Boston, transportation costs can be really exorbitant. And they're not cheap here, but they can be exorbitant there. So that's our quick primer on special ed.
So is there a body of people like you that petition the Senate or the House not to drop this circuit breaker level below 75%? And
Well,
how does this
if
work?
you look at, Mass Association of School Superintendents or Mass Association
Okay.
of School Committees, they're constantly pushing for those contingencies in the budget, because
Be
it's,
fully funded.
to fully fund the circuit breaker is just enormous, one of the larger features of the budget. And it's very much dependent on, the governor and the legislature as to what the proposals are for it. It's, as I say, it's been as low as 50 and been as high as 75 in the last 10 years, but it's not predictable.
Not predictable, but what do the tea leaves say for?
We're at 70 right now, but we're changing governors.
Yes, we are.
And this particular governor, when he was Secretary of A&F for a previous governor, was one who had it kind of low. So it's somewhat worrisome, but we'll see. I mean, that's all I can say is we'll see. It depends on the fiscal state of the state, and decisions will be made over the next few months as to where that goes.
Thank you.
So we come to what we came here for tonight. Took us a while to get here, but here we are. So our request from fiscal 15 to fiscal 16 is for an increase of $1.7 million over the budget. And this slide just breaks out very quickly what those differences are. You've seen the advancement proposal, that's $591,000, so that's a good part of it. Last year, this year, in fiscal 15, $500,000 of our budget was identified as being paid with one-time funds. They were non-recurring expenditures. So we've backed that out because we said those were one-time expenditures. Negotiated wage agreements, is clearly the largest part of that. That's not just unionized, that's union and non-union wage agreements. We are under contract for next year, and I'll come to that in another slide. But that is the cost, again, I'll come to it in another slide and detail it. The 2 new special educators, we will talk about that in a moment as well. That's not in the advancement budget. Those are 2 people we're going to talk about the need for right now. And a .5 FTE preschool coordinator. That's not the preschool teacher from the other slide. So this proposal actually has 2.5 positions in it that we feel we need regardless of advancement. Maintenance salaries to consolidated facilities. We have 2 maintenance workers. Their salaries and overtime amounted to $140,000. That is going to be transferred into the consolidated facilities budget. Bill Ritchie's budget will contain those 2 people. Those were the 2 people on our staff, as we say, who were maintenance people, and their salaries and overtime. We have sped tuition and bus increases of roughly $100,000. We have some facilities costs of roughly $100,000 and a variety of other costs of roughly $95,000, and I'll enumerate some of these things.
Will that money transfer to Bill Ritchie's group too, to handle that maintenance, or will that,
Which, the 100?
the 100,000?
No. That's, well, I'll come to that. That's heat and
Okay.
utilities.
Oh,
What we have done generally with consolidated facilities is while the salaries of the individuals tend to be in the consolidated facilities department, a lot of the maintenance costs for equipment and so forth tend to stay in departmental budgets. It's very easy for me to spend Bill's money, but if I'm spending my own money, I might reconsider some of the maintenance that we might need at the moment. So, I mean, that's been sort of the thought behind it, is a lot of the costs, the materials costs sit within in the various different departments. So the
So
140 really is just 2 salaries and overtime. It's not.
we'll get there, but for instance, Bill might do the purchasing of some of those things on a town-wide basis. The school might be the largest client for those supplies, but he will coordinate the purchasing,
Right.
but then the school will pay its tab.
We pay our share.
Anyway.
So, I mean, you've seen the advancement. We won't go through it again. You have the $591,000, and broken out a little differently. $198,000 is the 3.3 positions. $90,000 of the other money is actually the extended day and year salaries, the salaries of people who teach before school, after school, in the summer, and so forth. They're not new positions, but it is salary money because there are existing staff who do these things on per diem or whatever the other basis is. And $303,000 in non-salary spending. The negotiated wage agreements, this is the rollover of existing staff, including steps and lanes. Lanes are, for those of you who are not familiar with them, there are 5 lanes in the teacher's contract, generally reflecting increasing levels of education. So if someone earns a master's degree, they would move over a lane. If someone has 30 credits beyond a master's degree, they would move over a lane, or so forth. So there are basically education enhancements. You would want your teachers to be educated. So that's a fairly standard steps and lane chart that is in most communities. And the cost of living next year, third year of an agreement, is what's called a 1-1 split. They'll get 1% at the beginning of the year. They will get an additional 1% raise halfway through the year. At the end of the year, their salary will be 2% higher. The net effect to our budget is roughly 1.5% is the cost of the raises to us in fiscal 16. When you see in the backup salaries, that is that blended 1.5% cost. So technically speaking, not really the salary, because there's 2 salaries each year, but it's the cost that we will be paying for that particular person for next year. That will have a ramification actually in fiscal 17, because if you say someone's making $85,000 here, and in fiscal 17 you'll look and see what their fiscal 16 salary, won't say $85,000, because they were actually up 2% by the end of the year. But they're, the cost within fiscal 16 is the cost that I've put in your book.
And this is the last year of that
This
contract.
next year is the last year of our 3-year agreement with all of our employees. This does not include the advancement salaries. It does not include the sped and preschool positions that I alluded to a moment ago. It backs out the maintenance salaries. This is just a strictly rollover of everyone else. All right. And it's $1.3 million, or roughly 4.19% of that salary pool. Again, the denominator there, I had to back out the maintenance people and so forth who aren't there, so, but, so it's roughly 1.5% is the cost of living, and roughly 2.5% is the cost of all the steps and lanes and so forth. The 2.5 new special education positions.
I'll
You
speak
want
to
to
this.
speak to that one?
In the world of special education that we talked about, the tutorial, and Janet Sheehan spoke about new children coming in, the research in special education proves that children with special needs will advance, and they're a subgroup in MCAS, and make more achievements if they're included in the regular class. And we could stay here all night talking about if you and I are taken out of the classroom, the special education teacher doesn't have an English background, a math background, a science background. So the movement is towards inclusion, to have all children in the classroom, but to have the special education teacher go into the classroom and co-teach with the regular classroom teacher. When Janet Sheehan and Glenn and I go into a classroom, if there's 2 teachers, often you don't know who the children with special needs are. A perfect co-teaching model is 2 teachers finishing one another's sentences, but again, the IEP requires that so much time is in the child's IEP. It might be 4 times 60 minutes a week. It might be 4 times 35 times a week, but it's determined in the IEP meeting, will that time be a pullout or will that time be pushed in? So the emphasis, and the research proves that the more you can put the special education teachers in, include them in the classroom, have the children in the classroom, the scores, children with disabilities, their MCAS scores and their achievement will increase. And so we're moving towards this inclusion, but we need an inclusion specialist, K through 8, to work with our special ed teachers and our regular ed teachers. We have people who have been on the Warrant Committee have followed this special education. Many of the children who we've kept in the district, we've created at the elementary school these co-taught classrooms. And so children who would have been out of district are in these classrooms that are at the Tucker and the Glover. They come from across the district, and there are 2 teachers in the classroom. That's a special ed classroom setting, and so those teachers work at that, but we're trying to move across the district, having more children in the regular classroom. So this would be an inclusion specialist, and as the leadership team said, you have to work with the regular ed teacher as much as you have to work with the sped teacher to make this work. And so we're asking for an inclusion specialist. This also would be to work with all the teachers, to provide the professional development, to model, to go in and observe, to work with the principal, to make sure that this inclusion is working. And at the high school, we have a model at the elementary and then a model at the middle school. At the high school, what they're moving towards is, rather than taking the child out, the child with disabilities out, and I'm the special ed teacher, I don't have a degree in science, I don't have a degree in English, I don't have a degree in math, I'm a special ed teacher. So what they're doing at the high school is they're moving the special ed teachers co-teaching with the English teacher, with the math teacher, with the science teacher, and meeting the individual plan. And the high school principal met with Janet Sheehan, Glenn, and myself the other day, and they're right at the brink of, they're providing services to all the teachers, but moving towards this model. They already know how many children are coming up from the 8th grade next year with the IEPs. 1 more additional sped teacher at the high school. And then this preschool coordinator, we should call that a special, we'll call it, it really should be a special ed preschool coordinator. At the Collycott School, our preschool is housed, so when children turn 2.9 to 2 years, 9 months, and their doctors or their pediatricians or their families have identified that these children might have special needs, these children can be tested, and they're given individual special ed services beginning at age 3. And so we run a preschool, and again, it's the Milton Public Schools, the town of Milton's responsibility for these children who are identified at grade 3. So I would tell you, our former SPED director and John Phelan have both said to me, this is a growing population in Milton. I don't want to make anybody nervous, but you should look for more space because you have a growing special ed program. And so between this special ed program that's housed at the Collycott, the program at the Tucker, and we have a program that this Warrant Committee heard all about last year at the high school that's tuition-based. We're looking for a preschool coordinator with really an expertise to manage, which is what is in Milton, a growing population of preschool children. This used to be one class at Milton High School. They used a classroom at Milton High School maybe 10 short years ago before the construction, 12 short years ago, and now the preschool at the Collycott School involves 4 classrooms and an array of speech therapists, occupational therapists, and it is a huge program. So those are 3 needs in the world of special education that we've been watching and growing, and Janet Sheen could keep you here explaining to you when you're the principal or the guidance counselor owning that preschool program, it's a very, very specialized skill, these children in the preschool. So these are 3- and 4-year-olds who are not yet in kindergarten, who go to school, some of them 5 days a week, some of them, whatever their IEP says, 4 or 3 days a week. And all the services that that preschool child might need. So that's a total of $150,000.
As we mentioned, the 140,000 is the 2 maintenance positions transferred to consolidated facilities. Special ed costs, we have a $27,000 increase in transportation this year. Our special ed transportation is on the order of $770,000 a year. It is a large number.
170,000?
770.
770.
770.
Out-of-district tuition increase, we are predicting about 75,000 based on where our children are. You'll see there's an asterisk there because $100,000 of special ed costs were listed as one-time spending last year. You'll see the special ed out-of-district actually goes down by $25,000. It's only going down because there's 2 competing factors here. One child aged out, and we had $100,000 in savings there, but we also have a $75,000 increase on the rest. So it's still pushed. The $100,000 was included in that $500,000 in one-time funds that I mentioned on the earlier slide.
Right.
So I have to include the 75 here.
I didn't get a chance to see all the pages, but is the other 400 out of the 500 equally detailed?
Most of it was things like professional development and so forth. In the chart, I do indicate where money was, where advancement money was, most of it's advancement money, where advancement money was in fiscal 15 and where it is in fiscal 16. But I can detail it if it's not sufficient. That's not a problem.
Great, thanks.
The facilities cost I mentioned, heat and utility increases and maintenance cost increases. Again, you'll see in the backup how we've done the computations for these. We have, for instance, for the utilities and the heat, over the last 10 years, we have charts of month by month, how many kilowatt hours we have of electricity, what the cost is, and so forth. So, you know, when we go back to the detail pages later on, you'll see that, you know, at the end of November, we typically have spent 39% of our heat. This year, we spent so much money, so we're anticipating that this will be our bill for this year, based on 3-year average of usage and so forth, and figuring an inflationary factor for next year. We came up with a number. So the computation is in the backup when you go through it, you can take a look at it, you know. Not assuming everyone read every page between last night and tonight, so I'm sure you'll have questions on how we did some of those things. But we can walk through those. And the same with the maintenance cost increases. Based on running year averages of how much we've been spending for maintenance. And frankly, our new buildings are getting a little older. I mean, the new buildings are now 10 years old, some of them. So maintenance costs are starting to come up a little bit from, from the new days. So there are some increases in maintenance costs. And again, this is net of maintenance costs that we fund from our facilities rental account, for instance. We have spaces that people like to rent, the field house and the high school auditorium and so forth. And so in your backup, you'll see in the revolving funds how much money we take in rentals in a year and how much we spend out of it. And that also is money that's spent on maintenance. Maintenance and, for instance, if we have to hire extra custodians to cover an event, that custodian comes out of the, those overtime monies come out of the facilities rental account, for instance. But it's money that supplements the budget.
Glenn, could you quickly give me a heads up on the electricity bill? A lot of people are predicting huge increases in electrical costs. You're predicting 4%.
Bill Ritchie and I were talking about this. We locked in electric prices back in the beginning of November. So we're locked in for a year and a half.
And that includes all aspects of your electricity? I mean,
Yeah, I would, probably a better question for Bill on the details, but
okay.
we were lucky enough to get locked in before, when it was not the kind of cost that we were talking about now.
So this was a town-wide contract?
Yeah. We signed one for the town, one for the schools. We bid through Direct Energy, and we signed a contract with them to provide energy for the next year. We also have a contract with Wildcat Solar, which is a local group. They have the rights to develop a 5-megawatt solar farm on the roof of the old Stop and Shop warehouse in Reedville. The town uses 7 megawatts of electricity a year. We have signed a contract with them to buy their 5. So a large number of our electricity will conceivably come off solar, which is also at a better deal. The issue is they're still in the permitting phase. We don't know when that's going to open up. They were planning to have it open in the spring. I don't think they're going to make that deadline because their permitting was slowed down. We haven't figured that into our costs, and I know Bill hasn't either, because we can't count on it being there yet. But that's something as we go forward that could be a considerable savings. The town and the schools have signed 20-year lease agreements with that, with Wildcat Solar to basically buy all their energy. It's a great place for them. If you know the building, it's an enormous building, and they have the 2 main buildings of it, and it's right next to the train tracks, and it's right on the power grid. So for them, it's a no-brainer. They can connect into the power grid in 100 feet, and so it's a good situation. We spent a fair amount of time negotiating with them over the last year on trying to come up with an agreement. But as I say, it's not factored into here because we don't want to count on it. It's like, I'm not factoring any windmills into this either. We're going to wait and see.
Steve?
Glenn, since you mentioned it, the solar, do our school roofs have as many panels as they can take?
Yes.
Yes.
Every flat surface on every school building is covered with solar panels.
Any idea what that's saving us?
I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
And to that point, this finance subcommittee and Glenn spend an inordinate amount of time on all of this solar. And with this renting out, the Copeland Foundation, to your point about outside funding, when they enhanced the school building project after the project was done, and they created an auditorium that had 200 more seats in the field house, they have funded a part-time facilities rental person, because they knew that we're going to give you this space, but you should rent it. And so we're very fortunate. We don't have to pay the rental facilitated, but that is full-time work, and you always run the effort. When I see people in the auditorium renting it, I always think, am I using up the life of this auditorium for the town of Milton and Milton High School and the community? But again, we rent out every single space as much as we can and use that money. I think Bill Ritchie has said no town money has have to be used on the auditorium. It's all from the rental. The lights, any maintenance he's had to do since that auditorium was open. Again, but then you also, I often say, am I wearing out the seats for the children for, 25 years from now by the rentals? But that sometimes weekends in the spring, that auditorium is rented out every single weekend. Okay.
Phil?
I have a question about SPED. Your spreadsheet indicates that the increase from last year to this year is 466,000. Your presentation talks about 102 and then 154 new positions. What makes up the difference between the 466 and the 272?
What page in the SPED are you at?
Well, the first page of your spreadsheet, under the budget summary, indicates a dollar change in SPED of $466,700.
Well, some of it's salaries. I mean, some of it's absorbed in that 1.3
Some of it's
million
what? Oh,
salaries. Because, I mean, there's a significant amount of salaries in the special education line. If you go back to the backup pages behind it,
Okay.
you'll see. And that's actually, as we said earlier, a volatile number too.
About 200,000 of that 466 would be
You could
increased
break it
salary
out,
of existing staff.
it's on the next to last page, the last 2 pages of it. You can actually break it out by the DESI categories to see how much of it is salary for teachers, how much of it is salary